Great.
Hello, and thanks for making the time to join us this evening. My name is Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's Books. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're located in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village, where we've been around for 43 years now. We're open weekdays from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and weekends from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Our website is always open. You can shop day and night at annieblooms.com. We offer curbside pickup, in-store pickup, local delivery, a couple of different shipping options. I'm going to admit another person here. Welcome, welcome. Putting the link here in the chat where you can go and buy both authors' books. We would really appreciate your support in doing that. Tonight, we've got Oregon authors Travis Williams and Marina Richie. They're presenting their new books that are both on OSU Press. They're going to have a conversation and some readings of each other's works. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A. You're welcome to put questions in the chat that I'll read, or you can come on screen if you like, whatever you're most comfortable with. Let me tell you about Willamette River Greenways. Travis Williams, executive director of Willamette Riverkeeper, has spent countless hours paddling the Willamette, becoming familiar with its flora, fauna, and human neighbors. In Willamette River Greenways, he combines personal narrative about his experiences on the river with nuanced consideration of the controversies and challenges of the Greenway program. Williams sheds light on current land stewardship practices, revealing the institutional and leadership failures that endanger the river's water quality and habitat, and looks to the program's future. He also takes readers with him onto the water, sharing what it's like to travel the river by canoe, paying homage to the river's natural beauty and the host of wildlife species that call it home. Part policy analysis, part advocacy, and all love letter to one of Oregon's great rivers, Willamette River Greenways offers valuable perspective to policymakers, land use managers, and recreational river users alike. Travis Williams is the executive director of the environmental nonprofit Willamette Riverkeeper. He holds an MS in environmental science from Johns Hopkins University. In 2019, the Spirit Mountain Community Fund recognized his work with the Helping Hand Award, and in 2004, he was a recipient of the annual Skidmore Prize for his river protection advocacy. Now let's talk about Marina's Halcyon journey. More than 100 species of kingfishers brighten every continent but Antarctica. Not all are fishing birds. They range in size from the African dwarf kingfisher to the laughing kookaburra of Australia. The first book to feature North America's belted kingfisher is a lyrical story of observation, revelation, and curiosity in the presence of flowing waters. The kingfisher, also known as the Halcyon bird, is linked to the mythic origin of halcyon days, a state of happiness that Marina Richie hopes to find outside her back door in Missoula, Montana. Epiphanies and a citizen science discovery punctuate days tracking a bird that outwits at every turn. The female is more colorful than the male, unusual and puzzling, and the bird's earthen nest holes are difficult to locate. While the heart of the drama takes place on Rattlesnake Creek in Missoula, the author's adventures in search of kingfisher kin on the lower Rio Grande in South Africa and in London illuminate her relationships with the birds of Montana. In the quiet of winter, she explores tribal stories of the kingfisher as messenger and helper, pivotal qualities for her quest. For all who love birds or simply seek solace in nature, Halcyon Journey is an inviting introduction to the mythic and mysterious belted kingfisher. Marina Richie is a nature writer based in Bend, Oregon. She has worked as a journalist and managed communications for a number of wildlife-oriented public and private organizations. She's the author of the children's books Bird Feats of Montana and Bug Feats of Montana. Her articles and essays have appeared in Birdwatching Magazine, AT Journeys, Post Road Magazine, and many other publications. You can learn more at marinarichie.com. All right, welcome.
Thank you. Really appreciate being here. I think Travis is going to start us off.
Sounds good. Because I'm on a very thin line here in terms of connectivity, I'm going to stop my video just in case, because I think it's going to be kind of halting. So I'm going to click off of here for just a minute. So thank you for that introduction, Michael. That's really great. And we definitely appreciate you hosting us tonight for this reading / talk about our both of our works. And I think the cool thing is they're really interrelated in a lot of ways. When I started working on rivers, I think one of the first species that kind of jumped out at me was the belted kingfisher, and they're so evident, yet they're really they're hard to be around. They're hard to really find for the average person. They're loud, but they're seclusive. They kind of have these traits that are really interesting and sort of opposed to each other in some ways. And I think, throughout the course of Marina's book, she draws all of this out and so much more, which is totally awesome. So when I got this book to read, which I was pretty excited about, I realized how much I did not know about the belted kingfisher, and then certainly that species and related species throughout the world. So I really thank you for that, Marina. I think just telling people about this really cool bird species, and of course helping to illuminate other species while you were doing that is fantastic. But what we thought we would do tonight is just read a couple of sections and then ask each other questions about each of these. But there's a lot of places I could have gone in this book, and having traveled rivers quite a bit throughout North America and having seen this species, I think just the body of work here is really impressive. And looking at their life cycle, I think for a lot of species is really interesting, and seeing how, oftentimes it just seems to hang on the smallest filament of energy or luck or whatever. And suddenly you get something that fledges and has the opportunity to grow and hopefully, reproduce over time. But what I wanted to read here is on page 91, that kind of hits on part of your journey of seeking to find this nest that you did find and that had fledging chicks at a certain point in the springtime. I thought this was really interesting. So I'll just start out here. Halcyon landed on a boulder with a fish surpassing the male's 5-incher. Her no-nonsense, multi-syllabic phrase reminded me of a track coach announcing a tough workout. But the message was not for the chicks. She stared at the blind as if to pierce the nylon fabric. Lisa stayed for an hour. I kept watch for 5 more. Hours passed with intermittent warbler song, rough-winged swallow arcs, hummingbird hum, creek yawn, and not a flash of a kingfisher sighting. Somehow, maybe on a brief break, I'd missed the final fledging. Mid-afternoon, a rough-winged swallow landed on the lip of a burrow. After 8 hours, mostly in the blind, I stepped into the sunshine. A pair of flycatchers quipped from an overhead limb, their 2 notes forming my question, what now? Taking off my shoes and socks and wiggling my toes in the creek, I reread Dan's email of June 18th, which I had printed out and carried with me for this past week. And that goes, when the nestlings do start tumbling out, it can happen all at once, in an hour, while other times it can take over a day or 2. 1 or more might be too chicken and stay at the entrance. When that happens, the parents feed and herd fledglings in the trees and then go back to the nest trying to lure out the stragglers. After they're all out, they will stick together in a loose band, most likely wherever the parents do their fishing. Then, kind of brownie in motion, they just slowly drift apart and away over the next weeks. So in this particular instance, you didn't see that final fledging, and it culminates in this moment of realizing that had occurred. And I think it also illuminates how much work goes into just that process of trying to witness this and trying to document it and trying to accurately tell that story. And in the process, you realize that, oh, geez, we documented 1, but there are a couple that we missed here. So I thought maybe you could kind of tell us about that and the work that went into it and the kind of thoughts you had at that time and afterward about that whole realm.
Thanks, Travis. This is so fun. This idea of like, we're going to read to each other, and hearing you read my book is fun to see what resonated with you. And So I followed kingfishers, a nesting pair, or tried to follow them on this creek in Montana, Rattlesnake Creek, that flows out of the Rattlesnake Wilderness 20 some miles into the Clark Fork in Missoula. It's very much like places you would experience here in Oregon. But it's not easy to follow kingfishers. And I kind of went out in this naive way my first year, and turned out that after I missed all kinds of things, and I was just fortunate to even find one pair, because they have these secretive nest banks, these earthen banks, and they dig deep tunnels into the bank. And there's only one pair on this entire stretch of creek. So yes, I finally did find a hole. And as you can hear in that section, I had a friend, Lisa, who often joined me in the blind, so we could take turns. We set up a blind. I set up a blind across the creek, so I would try not to disturb them, because they're so easy to. They're just so easy to disturb, and they're incredibly skittish. So yes, I think some of the book is about what happens when you don't see kingfishers, and how you get connected to the rest of the neighborhood and the community, and you see such intricacies and connections. And but then there's big disappointments of what you missed. And some of my book is luck, like whether you were lucky to be there, and some is also reality. And I kind of felt that I wanted to encourage other people who might want to sort of try their hand at a little community science, following something they have a passion for, and not be intimidated by not being necessarily a scientist or having enough time. So even though I spent hours and hours and hours, I was also juggling a work life, freelance writing, and being a single mother. Well, at that time, I guess I was not yet divorced. That's what happens in my book, but I still had a lot to do with being a mom. And I actually had to leave for an appointment that I just couldn't miss. And I missed the fledging right in those like short interval that I had to be gone. So some of it is that, but yet the overall experience kept going for 7 years, and truly transformative in many, many ways.
What maybe I should have started out asking, what can you tell folks about kind of how did you get connected to this species?
Well, I have always been a bird person. I'm not an expert, but I'm decent birder. And I've just had a passion for writing about the natural world, but particularly birds. And I didn't necessarily have the kingfisher picked out as like, this is the bird that I'm going to immerse myself in, but I like them. And I didn't quite realize how challenging it would be to choose that bird. All I knew is that I was turning 50 at the time. I was like at this time where I just want to go deeper in nature and place and find something that I've never done before, and do a big stretch, because I wrote a lot of pieces about the natural world, but they're always like research done, a short week here, week two, or just had these forays into nature. But I did choose the kingfisher partly because I live near the creek, and I was enticed by their sound and the rattles, and I love water, and especially wild waters and wilderness. But then I had this experience of reading this definition one day of Halcyon, and being noun a kingfisher, and associating the kingfisher, as Michael said in the introduction, with the bird of happiness. And I was like, wow, well, and mythologically connected to a Greek myth, a different species of kingfisher, but still I like the idea of a transformative bird of happiness. So I went for it. And also the book does get into experiences with my dad, and who had passed away before I started this journey. And there was quite a bit of reflection in the book about that. But I remembered having a very beautiful moment with my father on the Appalachian Trail, where he was the project manager. And we were backpacking last 100 miles to Mount Katahdin, and had this experience of kingfishers flying in over this pond toward us in the light. And I'd written about that years ago, when I was in my 20s. So it came back to me.
That's really cool. One thing that I think you did really well, and you just talked a bit about that, was kind of the pacing of your focus on the species, your travels in relation to it, the level of inquiry and hard science and observation that goes into, figuring out the kind of seasonal migratory pattern, the fledging pattern and all of that. And then about yourself and how did you, I guess it's me saying that I think you did a really nice job of that throughout the whole book. But tell us about how you kind of sought to weave that through the time span of this story and this depiction of the species.
Well, I guess yeah, thank you. Maybe I could read something related to that one. I felt that I saw this always as a story, and I couldn't separate my own story and my life from what I was doing with the bird and the kingfishers and following them. But at the same time, I always wanted the kingfisher to shine. I knew it could be possible, and it certainly seems to have happened, that this is the first book that's ever been really dedicated and featuring the belted kingfisher. So I didn't want my story to compete, or I wanted to be humble in context of that, but I felt that sometimes it illuminated the bird and the experience and another aspect of the book, which is really about our kinship with nature and reflection, and how I think we all need a place, especially now we kind of have so many dark times and we're experiencing, but how we can find renewal and rekindling in nature and reflections upon our life, and maybe make some changes, and I did, as part of this. So I did have to make some choices about, and that was the revision process, what to cut out or what to move or what was too much, to have a balance of science, memoir, and mythology as well, which was important to me to tell the indigenous stories of the Salish particularly, but also some of the wider other kingfisher species in the world. And as I think people know, we only have the belted kingfisher in North America, except down near the Mexico border. Mexico border. But in the world, there's 120 species of them. So they're just so anyway, it's, yeah. So do you think is there something that might illuminate that? Should I take a stab at that, reading a little bit, and then we'll turn to you? I'm trying to think what.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Well, now I have to decide what that would be. Oh, some of it was just, this might be a good example. 93, I think this is the one I picked out. What the one? Oh, I know. 52. Oh yeah, there's a whole chapter I have where I lost the holes, all the kingfisher all together. I knew they're flying then, I couldn't find them. And I did have these experiences, sometimes alone and sometimes together. And this is one when my best friend came to help me out. So, and then so that kind of shows a little memoir in it. Each day mattered. What was I missing? On May 7th, my soul sister Sandra Murphy arrived for a week from her home, which was then in Flagstaff, Arizona. My friend is gentle yet strong, with sky blue eyes, shoulder-length auburn hair, a lean frame, freckles everywhere, and long skilled fingers. She has woven intricate pine needle baskets and often carves wooden spoons from tree branches. We could be actual sisters, despite my brown eyes, shorter stature, and decidedly unskilled hands. Must be the freckles. Taking the animal trail upstream, we hugged the edge of the rising creek as rains fell and dippers dipped. Every day we spent hours by the burrow bank. In drowsy, warm afternoons, we wrote in our journals. Admittedly, what we weren't doing was separating to seek the missing birds. Sandra and I found each other in graduate school in Missoula in the fall of 1987. From our first boogie out on the dance floor, we knew a lasting rhythm. We met at a seedy bar, but soon discovered our twin passion for what lies outside. For her thesis in environmental studies, Sandra wrote a book, Graced by Pines, an eloquent tribute to ponderosas. Her sunny calm soothed my growing disquiet. Maybe the Kingfisher pair had eloped far upstream, those triplets of song bewitching the wildest of Rattlesnake Creek's inhabitants, the black bears, mountain goats, elk, wolves, and mountain lions. Or would their ringing laughter be quelled regardless of where they are? This was the time for incubation and hiding. Scents of wild onion buffed the air, furled maple leaves dusted the sky, a wild turkey promenaded past us, his hot pink wattle flashing like an orchid in the jungle depths. The first mosquito of the season bit Sandra's forehead, not total bliss. Anyway, that's probably just enough to get a sense of that. So
That's great. So what else do you think, I would just ask, like in relation to conservation and things that you've seen changing and concerns you have about, you talked a bit about this in the book. What would you tell folks that would be kind of essential to looking ahead for this species and obviously others, and what concerns do you have?
And that's a great question. Maybe it'll be a good transition for me to shift to yours, because I think that's one of our intersections, is your book and mine. I think, the river, and the river for you is the messenger itself, and for so much. And for me, the Kingfisher is the messenger of the river, but they both have something important to tell us. I think the Kingfisher, the belted Kingfisher in terms of conservation is not threatened or endangered, fortunately. But yet, we have lost 1 billion birds overall since 1970, with losses in every ecosystem. And there are 1 million fewer belted kingfishers than there were, even though there's over 1.5 million breeding across North America. So, they depend on fish-filled, flourishing waters that are clean, cold. They can get by, better than some other birds when things are not particularly clean, but it's not their best habitat. And I think they are a great messenger for some of the creatures that are not so flashy. Like, I do think a kingfisher is super beautiful. You can see in this picture, there's just that roguish crest and that charisma and the head first dive and the way they can just catch a fish so easily. It's just, magnificent. But in some ways they remind us, they tie us to everything else that is harder to see, yet is so critical if we want our waterways to be resilient. And that's maybe a place for me to then transition into what I thought I would ask you about. Does that sound good, Travis? And you're switch over to your book, or?
Sure. Yeah, sounds good.
Let's do that. Because in Travis's fabulous Willamette River Greenways, you feel like you're paddling along with you so many times in different parts of the river. And yet it's full of your wisdom and observations, and tying in just all the travesties that have been done to the Willamette, yet still there's these treasures. And I wanted to just start just a couple things I'm going to share early on. This is just to give a little bit about you. And just in the beginning, in the preface, you say toward the end, all in all, my time working for the Willamette has been a valuable opportunity that has leaked far into my personal life. At times, it can be hard to separate the two. Frankly, my world is permeated with the Willamette, but that is something I embrace. Clearly, these chapters emerge from my work-life perspective, which should surprise no one. That perspective is shaped by years of experience, research, investigation, ongoing learning, and a great many days exploring the whole river system. And you certainly do throughout. And then I wanted to just also quickly reference the one place where you write about the Kingfisher. Have to. It said, so this is in The River's Gift, chapter 1. A few minutes lingering on the gravel bar shoreline can bring you completely in. Ageless and ancient, the river world quickly appears. The human grind of the everyday is weakened, diluted, and thankfully can even seem eliminated at times. While this blanket of riverine protection is thin and does not provide full coverage in every situation, more often than not, the stir of the water, the flex of the big trees in the wind, and the sound of a kingfisher moving along the shoreline can provide temporary refuge. I love that. So, but the main part that I wanted to, that I
I'm
chose.
glad I mentioned
Want to
that.
say something on that? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, jump in.
No, I just said I'm glad I mentioned the kingfisher there.
I know. So yeah, it was fun. Neither of us knew anything about each other's books or each other. And OSU Press, Marty Brown is so great with marketing director. She connected us too, and it's a great connection. River, kingfisher, a lot of overlap, I would say. So the part that I chose has to do with you writing about mussels on the Norwood Island side channel. And to save, because of some time constraints, what I did is I picked out a few little pieces. I'm going to jump a little bit through this. So you're in the side channel and you're with a colleague and you're paddling. And I'll start here. As we passed the midpoint of this channel, I happened to glance down into what was maybe 3 feet of water we were floating on. As I did this with just the right angle of sunlight, I caught the unmistakable presence of what looked to be mussel shells against a light-colored mix of silt and sand on the river bottom. Dark oval forms could be seen every so often, slightly out of focus as seen through the lens of river water. Floating above them, we turned the canoe upstream and paddled gently, holding ourselves in place as we looked down into the quickly flowing water. Yep, they weren't just the empty shells seen along the shoreline. Many of the shells were closed with live mussels inside. We could even see the minutia of the small openings or apertures along the slightly open shells that inhaled water and exhaled filtered water back into the river. We both marveled at the number of shells we could see dotting the river bottom. And you go on to say these are pearl shell mussels. And I wanted to jump to this next part where you are so questioning. And this is where also I see an overlap in our books. I think your book is a lot about being curious and asking questions. And seems like you never get tired of seeing the same stretch of a river, So it says, all kinds of questions came to mind. Why was this magnificent mussel bed here? How many live animals were there among the mix of dark shells, of the dark empty shells? Why were they empty? And had they died of natural causes? What conditions in this channel enabled it to support such a large number of these animals? My mind was filled with such questions, all of them framed by the marvel that this animal had had such seeming success living in the river system at all, given their limitations, from scant ability to move away from harm to the fact that these animals were subject to whatever the river and all of us sent their way. And the part that I just wanted to add one more, and then I'll bring it right back to you to talk about it, Travis. But I'm skipping ahead to just this incredible specific example of intricacy and complexity that I think helps all of us appreciate the holistic qualities of the Willamette and why every piece matters. So you're talking about the reproductive cycle. When mature, the male mussels release sperm into the water, which the nearby females incorporate. The female fertilizes the egg in the female, the sperm fertilizes the egg in the female, and soon larvae begin to develop in the female. The larvae are called glochidia. Am I saying that right? Okay. At just the right time, the glochidia are released by the female into the water. In what seems the ultimate game of chance, a few of the glochidia find their way into the gills or fins of native fish. In the case of the Western pearl shell, the native fish are thought to be salmon, winter steelhead, and potentially cutthroat trout. it seems clear the survival of wild spring Chinook and winter steelhead, both listed as threatened under the Federal Endangered Species Act in the Willamette River system, is essential to sustaining freshwater mussels. The tiny Glochidia then ride around on these fish for a few weeks or even months before maturing into tiny juvenile mussels. At some undetermined moment, perhaps dictated by water flow, water temperature, chemistry, or some other unknown variable, the small mussel detaches from the gills of the fish and floats away. It is not well known exactly what triggers the release from the fish gills, which in the case of the Western pearl shell is another very intriguing area for potential study. It has been said perhaps only 1 in a million of these tiny Glochidia released from the female mussel end up surviving into adulthood. Floating in the water, the tiny mussel that detaches from the fish gill sinks back to the river bottom in flowing water, and if lucky, finds its way between the rocks, other mussel shells, and wood, and embeds itself in the silt or sand. Here, the tiny animal has a chance to grow, beginning what can be a very long life of more than 100 years. The odds of the small mussel floating down from the gills of the fish to successfully land on the river bottom seems improbable at best. This is truly an amazing story of reproduction containing multiple stages, with each one presenting high risk of failure. Just the right conditions are necessary to make it to the next stage, was so very much dependent on native host fish swimming somewhere nearby. Clearly, this cycle is another astounding example of the complexity of life. I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit more about that experience and how, even though it's so fragile, how does that give you hope and maybe increased dedication to cleaning up the Willamette so these mussels can live?
Yeah. Thank you for reading that. I appreciate it, because it's obviously a topic that's kind of near to my heart, my passion, in relation to river protection. I'm going to turn the video off just because it's getting dark where I am here. I'll turn it back on before we're done.
You're nice and clear now, though. We can hear you well.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just leave it on then.
Yeah.
So I think, freshwater mussels, you kind of illuminated some of the fascinating things about them. And
okay, now maybe not. Video off.
I think a lot of folks don't know that we have this water mussels, and throughout the United States, they exist in many places. They have a variety of species. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of species in the Southeast United States, and it's actually a world biodiversity hotspot. As you go westward, especially across the Rocky Mountains, those species dwindle down to just a relative few. And in our case, in Oregon, and the same could be said for Washington and much of California, you really end up having the Western pearl shell. You have the Western ridged mussel, which is lesser seen typically than the pearl shell on the west side of the Cascade Mountains. And then you have a genus Anodonta that there's a couple different species of floaters that are hard to distinguish between each other, and then one that's obviously different from the two other species, but really it kind of boils down to 5 species typically. And I think when, to a person, when people hear that there is something that cannot really evade predators, it has a shell, so it has some layer of protection, obviously, but it cannot evade predators, which can be river otters, a couple of bird species, raccoons, things that we all see, at least have a chance to see, even in urban settings. But a species like Western pearl shell that can live to be over 100 years old in the right conditions. And I think that last part really illuminates many of our concerns today in regard to the health of river systems. And I go into a bit of this in that chapter and throughout the book, and perhaps I go into it too often, but when you look at the range of impacts on our rivers, whether it is the degradation of habitat, and that could come in a variety of forms, from urban development and rural agricultural impacts, hydropower and dam impacts, generally speaking, whether they're hydropower or flood control, really doesn't matter. Typically, there's some very stark impacts on how our rivers can act in regard to their kind of historic natural function. And then you look at everything that we as humans have become so good at putting into our rivers and lakes and oceans. So, you know, if you imagine yourself being a freshwater mussel, let's say a Western pearl shell for a moment, you're there filter feeding to survive if you've made it through that really relatively treacherous process of reproduction that you described, Marina, or you read. You know, there you are on the river bottom, trying to filter, trying to feed, and yet at the same time, you are subject to everything that humans put into waterways. And, you know, one thing that, I mean, I've been doing this work in the same job actually for 22 years this month. I guess I can say that today only since tomorrow's July, but, you know, that it is stark. We've gotten better in many ways in terms of how we discharge waste into river systems and lakes and oceans. Again, because I think, you know, many coastal communities may not know, but if you use, if your city treats wastewater, typically that wastewater goes into the ocean in a treated form. Even though we've got better, if you're thinking like a mussel, or if you're thinking about how mussels exist on a river bottom, you're filtering all kinds of pollutants, and they may be at de minimis levels, or in some cases they're not. And so that's kind of my point, that those basic impacts are still very real, even in 2022. And we have to do more to rein those in and to be better about how we deal with our waste. You know, no one wants to talk about that, but, you know, we have a system that's based on water. Now, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Maybe it made sense years and years ago where it was out of sight, out of mind. But in some ways, our society treats waste, whether it goes down your toilet, down your kitchen drain, down your bathroom drain, out of your dishwasher, and it's gone mysteriously and someone else deals with it. Well, I think we need to begin to better grapple with that, because of course, what we're all finding is that your pharmaceuticals show up. You know, the treatment plant can't treat those or filter those out before that treated wastewater goes back into the receiving body of water. Caffeine, you know, it's the same deal. And so as we progress, hopefully, as a species, we keep finding that, wow, the stuff that we, you know, used to think about, it's still a problem, and now we have these new add-ons. And so that type of thing kind of, you know, dominates my thinking and many others. If you think about what a freshwater mussel has to deal with, which then gets you back to what can we do better? Sorry, that was
No,
kind
that's
of
good. And I guess maybe that's something that I'm sure people want to hear a little bit more about. And I don't know if there's something you want to read about that, but I think, you know, as what you do in River Keepers, and also the whole concept of this book as Greenways is critical to your vision that you're also putting forward in here. And I think at times when people are feeling a little overwhelmed and like, what can we do to make a difference? I was impressed with what you have achieved in terms of land protection along the way and these natural areas and how that's making a difference, and sort of your vision for this Greenways as originally proposed back in the day in the 1960s. And so maybe there's something you want to either read from that or say relevant to that, that I think it's, as much as there's so many threats on the Willamette, you're chipping away at them, and you have this vision that I think a lot of people could be part of, are joining you and wanting to be part of. And your book is hopefully going to get a lot more people to do that and become river keepers.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so the general gist of the book and why it's called the Willamette River Greenways is there was a program that was put forward by former Governor Bob Straub in the late 60s when he was running for office, and it proposed creating a long stretch of lands along the Willamette that were publicly owned, and it was said to be the Willamette River Greenway program. And the original concept was really from the Portland metro area to south of Springfield and Eugene of having a solid expanse of public lands on both sides of the river. Some would be natural areas, some would be more developed parks, but the point being that it was kind of in the notion of the day when Oregon and other places were thinking big. You had the beach bill, you had the bottle bill. This was kind of that ilk, if you will. And where the story diverges is that, well, the Willamette did end up with the Greenway program, and several years later, it became something that didn't exactly match Governor Straub's original vision. Today, of course, we embrace it. We have about 13,000 acres of public lands up and down the Willamette, but compared to what he proposed, it's a relative far cry from that original vision. So, as we look at climate change, as we look at the needs of a whole range of species along a river like the Willamette or any other river for that matter, you do need those lands along the way that provide for climate change resiliency. They provide habitat today that matters, really, that's the essential thing. But when you take a step back, you look at how the state of Oregon administers environmental policy and administers and/or enforces environmental laws. And that's where I try to use the Greenway concept as a lens, if you're looking through it and saying, what are Oregon's green ways, quote unquote. I think we have fallen shy of where sometimes we proclaim to be, or as an environmental leader as a state. And the same can be said for other states, I think, as well, who feel like they've made great progress and describe all the accolades you've received over the past 50 years for something that happened 50 years ago, and that's great. Then you take a look at today, 2022, and where are we? What have we done for, again, clean water, clean air, clean lands? And so that's where I take a bit of a critique of our state agencies, our policymakers, people in the legislature who oftentimes have a lot to do with making environmental policy and crafting what occurs on the ground or in the water. And many times these folks aren't all that well equipped to be making those decisions. And that's no surprise to a lot of folks, but I think I come from a place of being curious and asking questions. And I think as environmentalists, and I think as policymakers, and I think together, we could all do a better job of helping each other along and answering those questions, or helping somebody being a little more curious about the Willamette if maybe their main thing is how Oregon administers its social system for people who have various needs, kind of working to better cover that spectrum of needs, if you will. So again, I feel like I take a pretty measured hand at critiquing the state, but at the same time, I think there's some glaring needs that Oregon needs to grapple with in regard to clean air, clean water, and healthy lands.
Travis, I think that's a really good place maybe for us. I'm looking at the clock and I'm wondering if we should we got like 15 minutes for discussion. Shall we have Michael jump in? And
Sounds good. We got a couple of questions in there already. One was from Patricia Sellinger early on to Travis. I think I may have met you when you were swimming the Columbia mile by mile. Would that be you?
No, that was not me. And I'm sorry, I'm in darkness right now. It got dark really quick. What was that guy's name? His name was Christopher. I'm totally spacing his name, but he swam at least a very good portion of the Columbia, was trying to bring attention to the river and its needs. And that was back in maybe 2005 or 6. Christopher Swaim, S-W-A-I-M. I just remember that.
All right, cool. That was helpful anyway. And Kip Field to everyone, wondering if the point of Travis's comment on non-river waste discharge is to land apply wastewater treatment plants, output or bypass traditional WWTPs altogether. Examples of this?
Yeah, I think, I just think as, I live in a city and like many others, and I think it's often too easy to just kind of not think about how we deal with our waste. And when you think about the sheer amount of water that, for example, and not to get gross here, but this is, we all grapple with this. You flush a toilet, that water is relatively clean water at that time, and it's used to carry your waste somewhere where someone else can deal with it. I think there's things that we could do as a society to decrease that amount of water that is used, and or look at other ways of dealing with that waste if you're in an area where it makes sense to do that. There's more that has been done on the front related to composting, water use overall, even in areas. You look at what the Southwest United States is doing in some places, which is great, and others not so great. It's like they haven't got the message that they live in the Sonoran Desert, for example. In Western Oregon, in the last few years, we have had real issues related to fire, related to drought. And I think even looking at a river like the Willamette that maybe 20 years ago, I never would have thought about in regard to water volume, we have to start thinking about that, and not just thinking about it, but actively changing the way we do things is what I think the key point is.
Well, all right, you got another question from Alicia McGraw. Is there a way we can get involved in helping to conserve the mussels? I am only halfway through your book, hoping to learn ways to directly help. Grateful for your long-sighted work.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing anybody could do for mussels is to help our river systems survive in a more healthy fashion. So again, water quality, healthy habitat, limiting the impact of dams, whether they are hydropower or flood control. When Marina read that part from my book that kind of describes that life cycle, if you look at all those touch points in relation to that life cycle, and for a species like the Western pearl shell to survive, supporting efforts that augment organizations like mine and many others who are doing good work in relation to the environment, but also helping us support those state institutions that have a job of regulating. And too often those are the folks who are overlooked. We expect a lot of them, but we also need to support them. And that comes down to dollars in the legislature. And that could be as simple as heeding an organization asking you to write a letter or testify or fill out a form letter. Sometimes those things seem perfunctory, but actually they can have an impact. Going to a meeting or a hearing and making your voice heard and being educated about what particular issues really matter is also part of that deal. So become a member of us or or many other organizations out there that work on this stuff.
Cool, thanks. Thanks to Kip for supplying the link to, looks like Christopher Swain video, a little documentary about him. So folks can go and watch that. Alicia is on it. Good job, Alicia. Do you have other questions?
I guess I could jump in on that a little bit, just in terms of what we can do. I like the point of, I think that there is the importance of getting to know your river and the place you love and water nearby, wherever it is, and both to understand and have those firsthand connections with mussels. Now that you know more about them, we all want to go see them, but even with kingfishers or whatever bird. And then you also start paying attention more to the threats that you see and what's wrong. And you can do little things while you're out there, pulling some invasive weeds and freeing some barbed wire or taking out some litter or just talking to other people about what you see. And then I think jump in on the policy level. But I believe that that's a key part of how we save places, is to have something that draws you there. And it makes you want to spend time, and get to know it and learn it and not go far.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right on.
That was a nice mussel shell there from Alicia.
Yeah, that's great. Where did that come from?
Where did we find it? It was by Elijah Bristow. We were by Elijah Bristow. There's a
Jasper, the little waterfall.
Yeah,
Jasper.
and we saw these open shells right by the bank, and so that got my attention. So that's what it is. It's
Yeah.
a shell. I hope
Very
that's
cool.
I don't know if that's actually legal to take an empty dead one.
It is. Yeah,
but-
you're totally fine.
I was very curious because I'm a high school teacher, so I teach a water class.
Oh,
So
nice.
right now, yeah. So I'm trying to educate the high school kids about this. This is a major interest. I am so grateful your book came out because you totally dragged on. I mean, look, I am so interested in this topic.
That's cool.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am.
That's great.
I signed up for Paddle Oregon partly because I just want to, like, you know what I mean? Learn more.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's cool where you are is you have some real what we think are pretty healthy populations there right in Eugene and below Eugene, and then some interesting stuff below Dexter Dam that we could talk about next month or in
And
August.
Dina-
But
Dina and I, sorry.
yeah,
We've both volunteered with Willamette Riverkeeper. We've both done that. So
great.
picking up trash in Eugene and then also in Corvallis.
That's great. Thank you.
Cool.
Anyway, so that's where we got it.
Thank you.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Kip has also curious if Marina has identified a next bird or other creature to hone in on.
Well, it ought to be the ravens. You can almost hear them out my door. We had nesting ravens here in Bend, like next to our house. They are so incredibly noisy. If you've ever had a nest,
Wow.
maybe you're hearing them. They never stop. They fledge and they keep coming back. But I am a big tree lover, and I am a bird lover. And so I'm putting those two together for my next book idea, because I think there's a lot of trees, and there's such an awareness building of the importance of forests, intact forests, big trees in Oregon. I'm also on the board of the Greater Hells Canyon Council over in Northeast Oregon, so involved in and speaking up for places. But I do have this way of, I think I see birds as sort of both ambassadors for places, and also there's the whole canary in the coal mine. Some people say it's already happened. But, you know, there's that part. But I don't have a specific bird, Kip, but I have several that are intriguing to me, including this white-headed woodpecker that comes in because they are very connected to ancient ponderosa pines, and they need the big trees. And I'm also going over to the Andrews Forest next week, the experimental forest, and I was there last week. I do write a lot about researchers and birds, and I'm going out with some people who are studying how birds use different parts of the vertical structure of 200, 300 foot tall Douglas firs. And my real hope was to climb up one of those trees. But now I have learned that the young 20-some year-old people might be a little better equipped than me. It seems like you need like rock climbing skills and harnesses and like, anyway. But I have this thought about how we all loved, when we were kids, we like to climb up in trees and like to be part of the forest. And as adults, we shouldn't lose that. And that's where birds can be, and they can show us things and new perspectives that we've never had, and maybe helpfully be spokespeople for spokesbirds for our last few remaining forests. So I'm working on this concept, but it's not one bird at this point. That was a long-winded answer.
Awesome. That's
Very
great.
interesting. All right, well, it is about time. So if there are no further questions.
Well, thank you, Annie Blooms, for hosting this. Really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Yeah, go over, for all you Portland people, go there and buy the book from Annie Blooms. And I'm looking forward to getting to Portland and meeting you in person over there sometime, Michael.
That would be great. Yeah, I'll throw the link in here one last time. You can pick up both authors' books there. Also, we're recording this event, so if you know folks who didn't get a chance to sign in to see this live, it'll be on our YouTube channel probably tomorrow. So you can go and check that out and share this with other people. So thanks, everyone. Have a really good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Appreciate it.